All right, joining us now from Washington, D.C. with a look at Axios AM, editor-in-chief for Axios, Johnston. Nick, great to have you with us on this hot and humid morning. What is Axios' one big thing for us? Yeah, our one big thing this morning is a scoop that Trump administration officials are thinking of New York City as the place for round 2 of the North Korea summits. This would be happening in September, possibly, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. This is when a bunch of world leaders show up in New York for meetings at the UN. The Trump administration officials that we're talking to are saying this could be used as a carrot, maybe an incentivization to keep North Korea moving forward. You know, there's been a little bit of a gap between some of the language about denuclearization and the actual actions. So offering this second round already might be a way to sort of buy some time to give the North Koreans more time to begin to act. Remember, Secretary of State Pompeo will be in North Korea, I think, later this week to try and push that process along. Yeah, if you thought traffic was bad during the UNG, I can only imagine how much worse it would be when Kim Jong-un is in town. All right, so Axios report comes, though, as questions mount over whether North Korea is actually taking steps to denuclearize. How might that impact a potential second summit? That's exactly the tension point here, that they're floating the idea of this second summit to try and get some movement on the issue of denuclearization. There were a lot of really rough headlines over the weekend reporting that North Korea might still be undergoing nuclear operations at secret sites, might still be working on missile development, and might be working on secret plans to continue work on nuclear operations even after they say they're stepping back on this. A lot of the experts we talked to about this issue are very bearish on this kind of progress. I'm reminded of a line. Remember what Ronald Reagan said about the Soviets, trust but verify. About the North Koreans, it's don't trust and verify. And the verification process is the real sticking point here about whether to make sure that they're moving forward on what they promised to in that first summit. So is there a widening gap right now between the president's optimism in what he is saying with his tweets, with what he said after the historic summit, and what the U.S. intelligence community is saying? Because it seems they're not now on the same page about this issue. Right. I think that's a good way of reading it. Donald Trump over the weekend in an interview said he would still thought North Korea was making progress, but the evidence of that doesn't exist yet. Inspectors haven't been into the country to figure out if this is actually happening. And then the reporting of Axios and others are showing that North Korea hasn't lived up to those promises yet and hasn't even followed up on the rhetoric from the first summit. So I think that's the big concern here, that whether floating an idea for a second summit now might show North Korea that the U.S. is serious about trying to get progress on that, but it's unclear if North Korea would actually respond. All right, let's switch gears for a moment and talk about another exclusive reporting you guys have over at Axios. This one about a bill that President Trump is considering, or at least his administration is considering, to blow open the World Trade Order. What kind of steps would that bill take? Right. This is a follow-up to our scoop on Friday when we reported that Donald Trump had been telling people in the administration that he hates the World Trade Organization and wants to get out of it. Well, now we have the proof on paper, a draft bill that Trump himself ordered up that would allow the U.S. pull out of the World Trade Organization, be able to set tariffs unilaterally across the board, and it would certainly completely upend sort of the global trade order which has existed around the world for decades. So how does this decision, if it does happen and play into the bigger policy of this administration when you think of all of the other organizations, agreements that he's taken the United States out of, whether it's issues like NATO, G7, climate change? Right, exactly. That's the list right there. You can see from day one of his administration, Donald Trump went to war with the global order, which he says wasn't helping American companies and wasn't helping American workers. That's why he pulled out of TPP. That's why he's offered, rather than renegotiating NAFTA, pulled out of the Iran deal, pulled out of the Paris climate deal, and now talking about this, blowing up the World Trade Organization. President Trump has been sort of very consistent in his rhetoric from day one that he thinks a lot of these multilateral global organizations don't help America, and so he wants them changed. All right, one more for you before we let you go. What are you watching out for this week? Oh, we're on 1 week away from a Supreme Court announcement. Trump told us on Friday that he's got a list of 5, so we're going to spend all week trying to figure out those 5 before he lets us know. Yeah, keep the cameras on the West Wing, see who's walking in and out. Nicholas Johnston, great to have you with us. Of course, we're going to be reading Axios AM in just a little bit. And to all of our viewers out there, you too can sign up for the newsletter by going to signup.axios.com.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.